Blessings. This is Arthur Beam with my wife, Teresa. This is part 2 of our Reformers podcast. To recap, in part 1 of the podcast, The Black Death, my wife and I discussed the 14th century plague that wiped out Christendom's priests. In response to this crisis, often the church had to quickly commission men as priests to give the sacraments. Many of the new priests were taken from the illiterate and ignorant simply because they had survived, and some were political appointees of the local lords and princes. The 2 centuries following, the church was crippled with uneducated priests teaching uneducated priests. And as most historians have noted, the after effects of the Black Death directly led to the Protestant Reformation. However, the Catholic priest Martin Luther didn't arise in a vacuum in the 16th century to reform the church. Many reformers had come before him, long before him, and that's what we want to discuss on this podcast. Starting with the Black Plague and weaving through to the present, we reveal how the history of the church is repeating itself in today's headlines. Why you are Catholic and don't know it. This is The Surprise Ending with Teresa Beam. There are those that state that, the Reformation was invented by Martin Luther. There wasn't any Reformation around until Martin Luther. He invented it and he brought it out, and the world seems to look at Martin Luther and Reformation as one. Well, what we found out is that is historically not accurate. In our research, we started to look specifically at the New Testament. And if everybody remembers, St. Paul, as he went around to different cities and towns, he would come back around a second time within the same year even. And what would he be doing? He would be reforming, because he would be telling them, you're not keeping the tenets and things that I have brought to you the first time, and you must keep them. Even if an angel of God comes to you, you must keep what I'm telling you right now. And so he was reforming. All the apostles, all of them reformed. So from the very beginning, the Catholic Church had reformers.
Yeah, they weren't... The early apostles were not allowing for personal interpretation of their particular writings.
That's right. So as I was looking through 1 Corinthians 1:10, now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, and that there be no schisms among you. And it goes on from there. It is full of reformative speech. There's no ambiguity in the apostles when they tell a group of individuals who have sworn allegiance to Christ and been baptized and are considering themselves Catholics or Christians, they were to act like it, they were to speak like it, and if they didn't, they were reformed by the apostles. Now the amazing thing, I thought, well, that it might stop there. You will have this big gap, and then you have Martin Luther, because being raised Protestant, you don't get all the connect the dots from Christ all the way to the Catholic Church as it is today. Well, when you start reading the Ante-Nicene Fathers, all of that goes away. The first one that I read that just really blew my mind was Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius of Antioch has a leadership appointed to him by St. Peter himself. He is known as the Apostle of John, the John. He was the first one to record the church calling itself Catholic. And it's amazing, his whole entire life is dedicated to reform. Well, why would his life be dedicated to reform if there wasn't an established church, an established way of thinking, an established way of doing things?
And doctrines.
Exactly.
Beliefs and teachings and doctrines.
Exactly.
And so he's trying to keep them on the straight and narrow.
And people would say, how do we know this? We have actual letters that he wrote. And he didn't write them to his buddies. He didn't write them to his dad. He wrote them to other heads of the church. And it'll say specifically to the bishop of such and such. And he says specific rankings
of the church.
Of the church, yeah.
Well, and people don't realize this happened in AD 107 when he wrote these documents as he was going to his death in Rome as a martyr.
That's just amazing. In 107, he went to death as a martyr, torn apart by beasts.
Let's go into the 2nd century with Bishop Irenaeus.
He wrote a very powerful importance piece called Against Heresies. When did he write it? He wrote it in the 2nd century. This is long time ago, long before Martin Luther ever came around. And if you read through what he has to say, he specifically is a reformer as well. All of these great saints and great people of the church were reformers.
The next group that I have is the 8th to 10th centuries was the Carolingian reforms.
That's right.
So, and then the 11th century?
The Gregorian reforms.
Okay.
The Gregorian reforms were a series of reforms initiated by Pope Gregory VII. In the circle he formed in the papal curia through 1050 through 1080, if you can believe it. So anytime you hear somebody trying to say that there's written proof all the way back to Christ.
Right. In 1098, there was the French Cistercians that specifically part of the reason they formed as a monastery with the monks was it was inspired by the age's strong spirit of ecclesial and monastic reforms. They were, this particular one was, they desired an effective balance between prayer and serious work. And so that was not just a person, but a group that came in.
And then in the 12th century, in 1190, you had the Carmelites, very, very famous Carmelites. Reformers. They're wonderful reformers. You've got 1313, the Olivetans, a branch of the Benedictines founded in 1313, right before the Black Death in Italy. Reformers by accident.
Right, they ended up reforming. They didn't start to reform, but they ended up being reformers.
Correct.
And so we were brought up to the Black Death, the clergy that stayed and ministered, the good clergy that martyred themselves to stay and help the people that were dying of the plague. 9 out of 10 of them died, and then the ones that ran off scared were the ones that survived it. And so they were not good priests. Well, that started up a brand new reform movement. Like in the 1440s, this woman, Saint Francesca of Rome, a wife, a mother, who lost 2 children to the plague in Italy at the time, a reformer who founded a religious community, and that was of lay people. Another wave came at the time of the Reformation, the Capuchins, which was a reform order of the Franciscans, were established. Then in 1538 were the Poor Clares.
And the importance of this, of stating all these people are reformers.
Right.
For their whole entire lives, they dedicate their lives and their money and everything.
Right. And then we have
to reforming.
We have 1592, the Reformed Carmelites, what they call Discalcid Carmelites, founded by St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross. Thomas Aquinas, Thomas More, Erasmus, the Jesuits were formed to reform the Catholic Church. The 1600s were the Trappists.
And just for the record, you have these people that are doctors of the church. Right. You have people that are PhDs. Mm-hmm. These are every bit, if not more educated than Martin Luther ever was.
Yeah.
And what they did was, remember what reform is. Reform is reforming something and sticking with it.
Right.
Not throwing bombs and running away and then talking the church down. That's not reform.
And the Protestant reformers were different than the Catholic reformers because the Protestants specifically tried to destroy the church. That was their stated, at least Martin Luther actually stated that he was trying to bring down the Mass, the church, everything. And so that was a very, very different type of Reformation than what we've always known as Reformation. And these reformers were actually extremely successful. But remember, each and every single generation has got to be reformed. They've got to make the church their own. They've got to believe in it themselves. And that almost always takes a reformation.
For 2,000 years, the Catholic Church has reformed itself. If you believe in reform, then you are Catholic, and you just don't know it. Surprise Ending Podcast has been brought to you by sunbeamproductions.com, where you will find links to the Beam's latest books featuring Teresa Beam's novel trilogy. For all those who love exciting and intriguing historical fiction, these are a must-read for 2018. The first in the series is Mission Vatican, then Mission Ambro, ending with Mission Lily.